Hey everybody, Edo here, and finally I have a little bit of a break from the Malpeak Kickstarter, which has been moving along, and I wanted to share a sheet that Jessica and I have been using for some time with other publishers. This is really sort of in that zone of still indie small pub, maybe, you've done 2-3 titles, you have a reprint, maybe 4 or 5, I don't know exactly, but it's a way to think about all of your different products and the print cost, and then the cost for bringing them, manufacturing them and shipping them in freight, and then how much revenue you're going to make. And basically, one of the things that I got reminded of recently was how many publishers don't realize how much money they're going to make on a standard print. Kickstarter makes it a little weird and interesting, but just generally speaking, I'm going to print 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 copies of this. If I sell them all, do I make money? Do I lose money? You'd be surprised. And actually, the increased freight and all those other expenses have been a big part of that. So I'm just going to walk through this spreadsheet and make it available to anyone who wants to use it, like I've done with a number of other spreadsheets. So hopefully it's helpful. As always, let me know if you think something should be added, adjusted. Folks are going to have to make their own copy to edit it if they want to. Okay, let's flip it around and take a look. All right, here we go. As I mentioned, there are a lot of pieces of information in here. So off here on the left, you'll notice that we have a series of games, small game A, tiny game, medium game, small game, whatever, with their quantity and price per unit. This is something you'd get from your manufacturer. You have to update it fairly regularly, but usually even older quotes are reasonable. I have to say, this will come up in other videos as well, but having a spreadsheet that actually has these values just in a table is so helpful. It'll save you from going back to old quotes again and again and again. Also, when thinking about future prints and updates and those sorts of things, it's really good to get more price quotes than just the one count you're pretty confident you're going to be doing, whether starting at 1,000 or going big, etc. So it's just a series of items. Also, there might be some other item that has, really small print associated with it as well, if you're doing a demo or something like that. Okay, so that's just this table, but we do pull from it. Again, I mentioned Jessica earlier. She is a spreadsheet wizard and has been, helping out making these very useful spreadsheets as we've been, building out and growing the business. So we have our game. Oh, and so the purpose here, again, for me as a business owner, is saying, hey, we want to do a print run. Shipping costs is crazy right now. How do we maximize what we put on the boat or in the cargo on freight? And how do we what money are we going to make it? If I do all of this, if I make this print run and it all sells, how much money am I going to make at the end of the day? So it's critical. You have to think about it. You have to understand what it's all worth at the end of the day, because you can kick all this up. And then again, numerous times folks say, oh, well, I ended up having to pay money or whatever, right? So it's worth understanding. Let's go through it. So we have our game, we have the quantity. And again, in this case, our objective, and all these numbers have been adjusted and tuned. They're not actually our, Jessica did a nice job of making this not our numbers spreadsheet. But the time we were using it, we were looking at how we could maximize what was in a 20-foot container. That's what we wanted to do. So I and that's by CBM. I'll get there in a second. But basically, thinking about what we were going to print was around how do we min-max that space. I'm going to talk about sales in a second after I get through this, but that's the idea. So you have a quantity, and again, super neat. If I change this, so let's go to medium game C, price per unit at 3,000 is 860. But if I change this to 2,000. That updates against this table. Isn't that neat? And if I go under 1,000 on small game A, it knows that threshold. I think if I go to 2,200, it's going to, let me go to 300, it's going to give me 375, right? Because you don't hit that next threshold. Anyway, so what you're going to find out is the quantity, the cost per unit, and then how much it's just going to cost to print. This isn't really taking into account stuff like, this is a lot of reprints for us, but not, sunk costs like molds or that kind of thing. That's covered elsewhere. This is the pure unit to unit manufacturing cost, right? So CBM, this is in red, orange or whatever, because what Jessica ended up doing is, for the purpose of this document, for folks, just gave like a ratio on size for CBM, cubic meters, by the way, for thinking about your games. This is the common way to think about how much is going to fit, in your carton. Not carton. Why can't I think of that word? I'll come back to it. It'll hit me. But when you shipping container, thank you. Ultimately, there's a couple key things in here, it's good shorthand, but this should not be shorthand. This should not be shorthand. You need to understand and find out from your manufacturer exactly how much these things are sized to, and then you can multiply from there. But it shouldn't be some guesswork. It should be exacting. You're going to be talking about two ways of shipping, either palletized or floor loaded. Floor loaded is basically all the boxes just loaded into the shipping container, and your CBM is basically, a factor of, the size of your cartons and your boxes. Palletized is a little different. You need room for the pallets and all those things, and it'll be heavier too. And so really, when I look at this on our sheet, this is like exacting. And we have some reference points that we use. But for shorthand, basically, you're going to want to know this, because this is how you're going to determine what fits in your shipping container. So we have, a percentage, a ratio could be helpful. It's worth knowing. It's always going to add up to 100%. And then shipping cost. So this number here is based on this number here. Let me use a different color here. Let's go with a blue. So if you want to think about like, hey, what if a 20-foot container actually costs $25,000? What would that mean? That's what it's going to be. It's the cost per title and how much it would cost. What if it was $45,000, right? Boom, it'd get bigger. The target CBM isn't actually using this. This is more of an eyeball thing. Hey, this is how much we're going to have in this kind of situation. What do we want to go from there? And again, floor loaded, you're going to have different ways of thinking about it, and different numbers you want to use here. You should certainly get latest numbers or different target numbers that you'd like, but you can sort of think about it. But again, this is helping me understand, what does it mean to ship all this stuff if shipping costs $20,000 not for manufacturing, for just doing this. The other thing isn't here is like, this is sort of assuming shipping to one location. If you're doing multiple locations and other things like that, you have to take that into account. You can expand this as you need it. So anyway, so then we have the rev per unit. So this is going to be different based on how you sell your titles. This is based on different price points, but Jessica just inputted some things in here. Here's what I would say. This number should be the sort of largest worst case sales volume that you get. That is to say, if most of my titles are sold into distribution and I get 40% of MSRP, this number should be 40% of MSRP. If you say, but wait, every once in a while you sell direct, or every once in a while you're selling at conventions and it's better than 40%, it's like, sure, but you might as well get the number on the lowest amount because you're trying to sell volume, and then you can always do better. So I like to think of this as the base. If you're using a consolidator, it's less than 40%, like an impressions or a PSI. So there's all different ways to think about it. I'll talk about sort of percent sales, but this is a good way to think about that. Again, are there places you're going to do better than this number? Probably. Also, for example, on our end, we have Herbaceous Pocket Edition, which does not get sold at retail. So we don't have to use that number. We use just like direct sales number. Anyway, so now this is the magic. It's going to basically say, hey, if you sell every copy that you printed at that amount, you're going to make this much money. This is the maximum amount of money, give or take some of those other things, you're going to make if you sell everything. This is hugely important. Hugely important. If I sell every copy, how much money? It's not a digital game and a mobile game, right? Like that's, I'm used to a world where you can, you as you sell more things digitally, you can just sell more things. But that world is not board game manufacturing. Board game manufacturing is you only printed this many, so you can only sell that. This is your maximum. Again, based on this percentage. So what were your expenses? So this is adding together the cost of manufacturing, the cost of ship per title, and then on the other end of that, you have a subtotal. So in this case, if we stop there, you're looking at generating $67,000. But hold on, perhaps you have some back-end deals, and I think again here, Jessica put in some just different royalty rates. Can be different percentages. Just make this specific. So just to be clear, and she obfuscated and changed a whole bunch of numbers. But like on our end, all these games have names and they all have their own deals. And so I know when Herbaceous is sold, the royalties I owe on Herbaceous versus something else. So you should know your exact royalties. And then they should be included here because your expectation is you're going to pay those. But either on print or after they're sold, it's some amount of money that you're going to have to spend. Now, this next column is sunk cost. Now, I often use this spreadsheet when thinking about reprints, but this is something you're going to want to think about when you're thinking about first-time prints. And this is where you're going to see things like, was there any development cost, art cost, molds, that kind of thing. You would add that as well. Again, if this is your first time printing through, and that's going to really eat into what your cost is. Now, depending on how you do this and how you want to think about it, you could say the Kickstarter covered all of that, and this is really we're going to assume it's zero in this case. But if it's a title that's skipping Kickstarter, it's super relevant. And so after you might have a title here, for example, this last thing, this other item. In our case, we're making a retailer sort of shipping stand, like a display, so that we're not selling it actually. So in this case, it's just a loss as part of a marketing retailer program, right? But it's worth knowing. The main thing I'd call out here when you're thinking about this that you really want to keep in mind and think about is, look, you might, if I saw 100% of what I'm going to print at the end of the day with all those other costs, as written here, I'm going to make 50 grand. I will say it's worth note that's making 50 grand on, 90 grand of expenses, right? It's a lot of it's not the greatest multiplier because you have to print everything. And that's where this capital, even when Jamie Stonemeyer Games talks about having, all this expense, manufacturing expenses, it's this kind of thing. It's like, yeah, we had to spend $200,000, and after we print everything, we only make $250,000, or maybe in his case, $400,000, whatever. The other thing is you might not sell all of it. So what you might want to do is say like, okay, well, what happens if I only sell 75% of what I print? Well, suddenly, that might not look as good, right? Like suddenly, if I only sold that many, this isn't going to work the way I want exactly. Hold on, that didn't work. If I didn't sell, let's just assume that my expenses are the same. My royalties, the royalties would change. I mean, you can do your math, but and I don't know why it's giving me a hard time, but the loose thing would just be like, oh, hey, the diff here is, let's just do the easy one here for me. I'm actually going to remove all this, but if we just say this minus this, right, 38,000, and then this minus 38,000 is this is the kind of thing you just want to be thinking about, right? So I didn't go over royalties and stuff, but very quickly, if I only sell 75% of what I thought I was going to sell, and the rest literally don't sell, then it's only 15. So if I sell 50%, if this 5,000 unit print, it's going to be a title by title thing, but if this is a dud and it's miscalculated, you're going to be hurting. So that's why this math is so important. So important. Two last things. So one, Jessica put some terms in here and what we typically use when we talk about here. We don't have floor loaded or palletized, but that's something you'd want to be thinking about. Also, you might not pay for, if you're LCL, if you're sharing a container with somebody else, it might not work that way either. This is meant to give you an idea. The other thing that we have here is a sales calculator. So it's not a calculator. It's just a tracker sheet. We have a way more robust year-over-year one, but this is as you're getting to be a a bigger company, you can start looking at, or having more sales, how much product you sell year over year, and what your sales trends are and what they happen, and where you have big sales and small sales and all that kind of stuff as you're thinking about new products. So for example, game A here, and these are should all update live. So if I were to make this 400, it'll update the little graph if you need a graph. But basically, you're looking at your title and you're saying, hey, here's what we've done in the past. Here's what we have in stock. We've got 200 copies in stock, and we think in the next 2 or 3 years we're gonna sell 5,500 based on historic data. Well, in that case, this is a no-brainer. I should reprint this title. Because I'm totally out of stock and I expect there to be sales. Frankly, if you're in this situation, it means you should have printed stock. You're behind. You should have already reprinted, because you're gonna, in my case, in the case of Herbaceous, it's gonna be out of stock for a while. Here's a different example. Well, here's a title that we're looking at. We think is going to have 500 sales over the next 2 years, or it still has 800 in stock. So in this case, it doesn't really make sense to reprint because this is going to last us years already. Here's another case where perhaps, here's an example where sales is higher than stock, but not by a ton. And so given this ratio, it'd be like, well, am I going to print? Is it going to be 1,000 unit print? Well, you might look back and be like, well, at 1,000 unit print, there's very little margin. And if I'm not 100% confident that it's going to sell, it's not worth doing. That kind of thought. And then you have these maybes. Then you have these places where, you have a lot of stock, sales are pretty good, but isn't it good enough? And, the discussion, this debate typically turns into, is it going to look like this, where it's growing and I don't want to be in a situation where I don't have stock available? Or is it going to look something more like this, where it's shrinking? And that's the challenge. So anyway, look, you can make this your own. So if you go to File, it's make a copy, you make a duplicate, you can edit it and do whatever you want with it. And to be fair, we have like a whole swarm of other spreadsheets and things we use as well. But I feel like this is a pretty good one to just hone in on, like what it takes, like what you should be thinking about in terms of expenses and freight and really, does it make sense to print this? What does it make sense to print these many copies? What do I think? What is my sales prediction? This is sort of, a lot to do with sort of reprints, but I used to have this with just 3 titles or 2 titles or 1 title. So it's not a terrible chart, even if you're smaller. We're now getting into some like mid-publisher range stuff. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. Again, let us know if you'd like to see any additional information. Thanks. Bye.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.